The next 20, 50, 100x altcoin is here. This is the time where the millionaires are made, but they're only made when they sell. And there's some interesting data that shows if you were to put in $1,000 in each of the top 100 altcoins, you would hit phenomenal gains. But when do you sell? That is the question that we should be asking, not which altcoin, because as some of the data suggests, you could essentially just throw your money at anything during this period and make a lot of money. So when do you sell so that you can become crypto rich and make those millions of dollars? But is there an easy answer to this that anyone can follow, including you watching this right now? I seem to think so, but there is a big but, and we all like big buts. It is actually applying the rules and the strategies. That is still the challenging part, which is why over 90% of people lose money in the markets. So do I have the answer? Well, yes, and the answer has worked for me, but most of us, including myself, still have challenges applying it, because when we see these things play out, the objectivity, it makes sense to sell, but the subjectivity and what's going on in the market still make life really difficult to do these actions at the peaks. And so that's why we employ plans and strict rules to get us out in time. That's what we're looking at in today's video. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. It is our 3rd birthday special as well. So if you want to join TI Premium to follow this in real time throughout the bull market, link is in the top of the video description. The sales coupon is coming out to your email address in another 24 hours time. And congratulations to you guys who got on board this morning. There's only 48 hours to go. Okay, let's kick it off before we have a look at some of the trades as well. We're looking at subjectivity and objectivity. I want to give you some strict rules today to employ for your plans so that hopefully you can get out at the peaks. Now I'm going to start with the subjectivity, the market sentiment. This is the difficulty, and I love seeing this post over and over again because of the time delays from when I post these particular things on X, and you can see what people are thinking at the time. Now, if you can grasp that, you will see when the time to sell and when the time to buy is. This post was from June 2023. The markets were hitting a bottom and a higher low, but at the time, when you can see through some of these comments, most were thinking, are you sure? I think there's still further downside to go. There's a lot of people still thinking that this market would collapse from that point, and it didn't. June 2023, fantastic time to be buying stocks, Bitcoin, cryptos, everything was at a bottoming stage for that cycle. So this is just the subjectivity. So it takes some time to really be able to employ this into the market. That's why I just wanted to mention this first before we get on to the objectivity, looking at the lines on the charts and those strict areas that hopefully leave no room for misinterpretation, or at least that's what we aim to do here. So, Wall Street cheat sheet. We get to the peaks, euphoria, thrill, belief, that always comes into play. Now, if we get too excited at those peaks, like we've seen in the past, then the market pretty much pulls back quite hard. We get a bit of a complacency bounce, and that is the next best time to sell before we get the breakdown. Now, I want to go through that on the charts to have a look at what that looks like with specific lines so that we can hopefully get out in time. And I'll give you an example of what I did back in 2021 now on Solana, getting out through those periods of complacency and then the breakdown through the anxiety period. So for Bitcoin, we've done this multiple times, so I'm not going to bang on about this too much now. We went through the Wyckoff accumulation schematic on the macro time frame here, nailed this one. It takes time. Many were doubting it, especially when we had the banking crisis. You can see here, that was the banking crisis, and look at where we are now coming from that banking crisis at 19,500. This was the FTX crisis. This was the June low that we were talking about earlier, the stuff going on with Binance and all sorts of bad news around why crypto had to crash and the SEC was coming after us and all that sort of thing. Then we had the September low, which was kind of similar news to the June low as well. And then obviously we know what's happened since June and October of 2023. Well, it skyrocketed. Everyone forgot about all of these problems and the ETF news came about. So now that the ETF news is over, it looks like we're having a pullback. And that leads me to the next chart. And that one, of course, was the Wyckoff schematic on the distribution, but on a shorter term time frame on the 4-hour. So we had all of the hype up, the good news about what's going on and why the ETF is here to stay, and why Cathie Wood tells us Bitcoin's going to $1 million, and all the sorts of nonsense that goes on at these peaks where at least the headlines get louder and louder at that time. We had a UTAD, an upthrust, so that's pretty self-explanatory, after distribution, that is your distribution, what the pattern looks like there. And then the market collapsed from that point, showing us an SOW, a sign of weakness, with all of these complacency bounces into last points of supply. So that's what the acronym stands for there. Sign of weakness, last point of supply, sign of weakness. Maybe we get a high bounce here to 43 or 44 as we've covered in the video yesterday, just looking at previous support and resistance. Nonetheless, unless it gets back above previous significant resistance levels, then they're essentially complacency bounces. And that brings us back to the complacency here, which are good times to sell off. So it depends on the time frame you're looking at. That is going to be a big one for you guys for your own specific plans. This is the poll that got me interested in this topic for today. Is the biggest problem for traders to make those 20, 50, 100 X's choosing the best alts or knowing when to sell? Now, I popped this up yesterday, tons of votes. The majority of people, we could basically call this 80-20. 4 out of 5 people want to know when to sell, and 1 out of 5 people say choosing the best alts. So as we could see from the previous cycles, if you could throw any amount of money at any of the roughly top 100 altcoins, and you would make money from that. But we know over 90% of people lose money in the markets, and I suspect they lose because they do not know when to sell. They get rushed into the market at the peaks, and then they fall into the complacency trap, down to anxiety and denial, and they just wait and wait and wait. And this is massively eye-opening. Choosing the best alts, knowing when to sell, choosing the best alts, 18% think that, and 78% want to know when to sell. Either those who know when to sell just want to find the new alts now, or the majority of people are, I would say, being relatively honest here, and they just want to know when to sell. So I want to look at some timeframes as well as specific lines on the chart that you can action. Here is one of the simple patterns that you can use in your own trading. Now, the important thing to note here is the peak and when the market tests that peak, so basically testing the resistance and then coming back under that and closing underneath the resistance on a more macro time frame. We're looking at it on the weekly here. So you can see on the run up out of for the bull market from 2021, there was a nice big peak. Market tested a high and then closed back underneath it, and that led to the big collapse from that point. Then we did it again, or at least Bitcoin did it again during the all-time high, the second all-time high of 2021. It tested the top, closed underneath it, then a very, very swift reversal from that point. Then the next most significant part, this was basically the complacency bounce that you see on the Wall Street cheat sheet. That point, again, you had the peak, the market tested it, closed a couple of times above, but very barely, back underneath it on the third week, and then the collapse from that point. Now, on the shorter term, it did it again. There is your peak, bit of a pullback, another test, another pullback into the banking crisis. There is your peak. So you can see here on the Gann swing indicator, if you guys have access to that, move up, close underneath, and then of course there was 2 months of grinding to lower prices. Same thing again. There is a peak, there is a test, closed underneath, market grinded for 2 months. And again, when we hit that for the Wyckoff distribution, there is your peak, swing indicator here, move to the upside, all of that extreme excitement, big close underneath, and the market's basically reversed from that point. If we look at it on a monthly as well, it's a pretty decent reversal bar so far on the monthly, and it happened again at the peak and the other peaks, and a reversal here and a reversal here. So you can see how it continues to work out time and time again if you're able to see the patterns on the chart. But as you would know, because this is fresh in everyone's memory, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it was all about the ETF hype, and all we saw was this happening. Meanwhile, there was distribution going on, the market was reversing. So knowing when to sell is going to be the key here as we move into the maniac stage, the crazy times of the next bull market. So knowing when to sell over choosing the best alts, because essentially you can basically throw your money at almost anything, make those 20, 50, 100 X's, but then lose 90 odd % of it to the downside if you don't know when to sell. So we've covered the first thing, the subjectivity, the difficulty. If you can start to implement that and learn how to use it, you're going to do fantastically well. So keep an eye on that. Now we've gone into a pretty simple pattern to look at here. Basically a resistance, pullback, a test of that resistance, a close underneath. Use a bigger time frame. Don't get sucked into the 1 hours and the 4 hours for bigger moves. They're great for short term. Then if you get the close underneath, probably, not always, but probably going to see a little bit more to the downside. Next, we have timing. and more support and resistance. So timing is the big one here. I'm looking at this on the macro time scale. I'm going to use two key areas. The first is when Bitcoin breaks or at least tests a new all-time high, and then we measure to that all-time high. All too often, everyone says, well, when Bitcoin hits an all-time high, I'm going to sell. But Bitcoin hits an all-time high almost every single day of that 12-month period. So when do you sell? So that's what we're looking at here. That's why I'm measuring from a test of the previous old all-time high and then a break above that level. And then we want to measure in time to the next high. So previous cycle, we broke out in, tested in November and then broke out in December. So they're going to be our two key points that we measure from. And we measure to the all-time high. So we have 12 months from the test of the previous old all-time high, basically $20,000. December breaks out, which means this would be 11 months. And then we know that we have roughly 11 to 12 months left in the bull market. Now we could test to the first all-time high because that was essentially where all of the excitement was. That was 5 months. But let's take it back to here. That's roughly 12 months. So now we have two numbers in mind, 5 to 12 months. Let's go back to the previous cycle. All-time high of 2013. The test of that top was roughly February, March of 2017, so 4 years later. Then the all-time high came in December of 2017. So again, we measure in time. That is 9 months to the March breakout. So basically the price broke the previous all-time high in March. It reversed and then went on a nice big run in April, May, and a little peak here in June. So in terms of the timeframes there, you have a rough test around 10 months. You can almost bring it back to this one here in January. That's 11 months. So somewhere from 8 to 11 months is a pretty reasonable reading for that previous cycle. Going back to the next cycle. This is the cycle low that I count from. Others may do it differently, but this works for me. That's why I use this as the cycle low. And this move up is basically the way I see it as the first breakout of the accumulation, because from that point, there was a lot of time underneath that high. So the market was essentially building up enough energy to have another push. So with that in mind, we have the top here measured to when the market decided to break out again to the all-time high. That gives you 9 months. So you can see a rough pattern here. There's 9 months. In this case, it was 9 months as well. And in this case, it was 12 months. So if we're looking somewhere from around that 8 to 12 months to give us a bit of leeway, then we could anticipate when Bitcoin tests this next all-time high, we may only have about 8 to 12 months left. Now, there's going to be one little added layer of complexity here, but you guys are smart enough to understand that markets aren't always that simple. Have a look at what happened in the previous cycle. We had 5 months here. So it might be too early in that case if the market does run up 5 months, the altcoins that you're holding, but maybe it might be an idea to take some profits off the table, roughly 4 to 6 months once Bitcoin hits a new all-time high. That's just a theory looking at the data from the previous cycle. Now you don't have to, but I would at least write that down so that I have 2 points in mind when the market does break to a new all-time high, when Bitcoin breaks to a new all-time high, and I've loaded up on my altcoins because I'm going to become a millionaire of some degenerate move to 50 or 100x. So that's objectivity number 1, specific timeframes. Now you can count specific bars. We hit that point, the countdown is on, the clock's ticking, time's going to run out. But while the time is running out, you guys are here in the party and the party's going off. There's hope and optimism, belief, thrill. You've got Kathy Wood telling you this is the bull market scenario. It's the best bull case. We're going to 1.5 million. You've got all these other influencers telling you that Bitcoin's going to go to 300K or 500K. And this is only just the beginning because, of course, they're only here for the clicks because there's only a certain period of time that you have in these markets while they're going ballistic. You've got newspapers, you've got everything going on, you've got media headlines, all that sort of jazz. That's what happens. It's what happened to us in 2021. It's what happened to us in 2017. And to those guys who were around in 2013, I'm sure it happened to them at that time as well. Not as big, but the same thing happens every single cycle, no matter which markets we are in. So that's Bitcoin in terms of the time frames. We've got that in mind and the subjectivity. Now, the next big one for the altcoins, and this is a really, really easy one, especially if you have the TIA Gann Swing Indicator. You guys can find a link to this in the top of the video description. There is a 7-day free trial, and within that trial, you have plenty of videos to understand how to use the swing indicator. Otherwise, get on board with TIA Premium while there is a sale on, and you'll get exclusive discounts to the TIA GAN swing indicator as a TIA member. All right, so this big one here is the Bitcoin chart. So your altcoin against your Bitcoin chart. Now, we've looked at two major things here. So keep those in mind. It's when Bitcoin goes to a new all-time high. Yes, we've got that in mind. And then we measure to those peaks. Now, when we look at the altcoin against its Bitcoin value, if we've missed out on that first peak, in the case of Ethereum back in 2017, there was only roughly 3 to 4 months after Bitcoin went to that all-time high. I remember we had February, March of 2017 when Bitcoin was testing and breaking to that new all-time high. So it was 4 months for Ethereum against its BTC value. This is why the BTC values are so important, because you get to understand the strength of the altcoin. It's going up faster than BTC in this period. A lot faster, massively. So we get that, 4 months, then a massive, massive decline. So from that peak, it lost a ton of value against Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, I think it was going up at that time. So against its USD, it was okay, but it was losing a lot of value against BTC at that time, 85% in fact. Now, when Bitcoin got its peak in December, it had another couple of months, just under 2 months, of its own move into February of 2018. Meanwhile, Bitcoin was heading down. So the US dollar values were heading down, but it was still holding pretty reasonable strength against Bitcoin. Okay, Bitcoin was going down, USDs were going down, but the strength against Bitcoin was going up. Now, this is the important part here. You can see that this is a lower top. That is fact. That's just the data. That's the fact there. It's objective. There is no subjectivity about this. You get this peak here and a big reversal. That is telling you that there is some weakness coming into all of the markets. Bitcoin has already started heading down. The altcoins have already started heading down, and they're putting in peaks that are lower than their previous tops. Typically, this happens every cycle, and if it only breaks slightly above and closes underneath, as we looked at in this first one, there is your next signal as well. So in terms of time frames here, there's 12 months again. So it's a rough 12-month period after Bitcoin breaks to a new all-time high, and then you get this lower top put in on the altcoins against their BTC value. So that is ETH. Now, Solana, does it do the same thing? We'll look at that against its BTC value first. There it is. Lower top at Bitcoin's all-time high. So there's December 21. Bitcoin's all-time high was November 2021. And you would expect all these markets to continue up, but they didn't at that point. This is just the facts from the charts. Whatever your belief is about the project and whether you want to marry it or not, that's another story. Nice thing to remember here is hit it and quit it. You don't want to get married to these things, okay? So there it is there. That is the lower top at the Bitcoin all-time high. You had this move here, and then the market collapsed from that point. So from when Bitcoin hit a new all-time high to the peak of the altcoin against its BTC value, you had about 10 months. Now to the Bitcoin top, you had about 12 months. So you can start to see this pattern forming. Roughly 8 months, just to give or take a few at the lower end, as we've seen from previous cycles, and maybe give or take to the upper end. We've seen 12 months many times, maybe give or take to 13 or 14 months, but I wouldn't give it too much more, because you can see at 13 months, you're getting another peak, and by 14 months, it's really starting to come back down and test those lower prices. As another example of the selling point, we can see that that's the Bitcoin new all-time high there, November 2020, and we measure forward that point to the peak. So 12 months to the US dollar peak on the altcoins, because of course Bitcoin was also peaking in November of 2021. Now, if you happen to get out a couple of months sooner, that's September. So that's where Solana peaked against its BTC value, but it kept going up against its USD value. So even if you take profits from those altcoins into Bitcoin, you've still got a little bit of profits to be had from holding Bitcoin in that last period. But at the end of the day, these things collapse every single time, 80, 90, 95% against USD value. And of course, we also want to make gains in USD to become that crypto rich, crypto millionaire. So that gave you roughly 10 months to that peak, and then of course 12 months to the USD peak. So you want to become crypto rich with the 5% of people who actually make it in the game, know when to sell. Don't worry about choosing the best alts. There is a plethora of altcoins out there. Knowing when to sell is going to be the key issue here. And what we've gone through in this video is 3 major areas that you can use to your advantage to sell and make a profit. You're not trying to sell at the exact peak or buy at the exact bottom. You're just trying to sell to make a significant profit. And profit like TIA members. Remember, there is a third birthday sale going on right now. Congratulations to you guys making profits on your trades over there. And Michael's scooping up some good profits over on his trades as well. So if you are a member, he's put in some pretty big posts over the last couple of days. Go and check those out in Crypto Trading for Cash Flow. There is a lot of content to get through over there for you guys. All right. Hopefully you found a ton of value from that. If you have, share it with a friend. Be crypto millionaires together in the next cycle. I'll see you at the next video. Like and subscribe. Until then, take care and peace out.